Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alpha Movement podcast. Today's guest will be appearing in just a second, but before we get into my interview with Dr. Kirk Parsley, I just want to get over a bit of housekeeping for you. Firstly, I'm thinking about doing some more Q&A sessions because they're going down really well. So if you've got any questions, send them into tom@alphamovement.co. The other thing is, if you're looking for a bit of a change up in programming and some mindset shifts at the same time, check out my free 21-day program that's on my website, which is alphamovement.co. What you'll see there is a box in the middle of the page and the top right hand corner of the page saying free course. If you jump on that, then you'll get some free programming, you'll get some mindset shifts, and everyone's happy. So without further ado, here is the episode with Dr. Kirk Parsley. Welcome to episode number 17 of the Alpha Movement podcast. I'm lucky enough today to have on the show Dr. Kirk Parsley. He is, as he'll tell you in a second, an ex-Navy SEAL or a former Navy SEAL and an expert in sleep. He's also been a very highly competitive athlete at certain stages in life. So without further ado, hello, Doc.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Just to start off, because I know I butchered your intro, could you give us a bit of an idea of kind of how you got into sleep in such a big way to begin with?
Yeah, sure. This is one question that I really tend to meander on, and so if I start blathering,
go for it.
If I start blathering too much, just say, hey, that's enough. We're going to move on. So I mean, honestly, I never really had any specific, interest in sleep, throughout my life or my education process. It wasn't anything, really compelling to me. I don't know if you've ever heard my TED talk, but I went through, probably about a dozen years of some pretty serious sleep deprivation, where I was probably sleeping on average about 5 hours a night, and I was breaking down, and I was only 30, like in my late 20s and early 30s, and I just kind of started falling apart in all sorts of ways, I had this great physician in medical school he was literally like 70 years old, and he was a board certified family practitioner and board certified psychiatrist, and he was a professor at the school, and just a fantastic guy, and obviously very experienced, and he never once asked me about sleep, like how much are you sleeping, or how, anything like that. Like, it never came up. I never learned anything in medical school about sleep. I mean, if we had a class in medical school, it would have been one class, and obviously I slept through it, but I don't remember a single bit of information coming out about sleep, other than like during the pharmacology class talking about sleep drugs. That's about it. So, fast forward some years, I finished that. I go through, the Navy undersea medicine training pipeline, and then I get back to the SEAL teams as their doctor. And SEALs are a lot like professional athletes or firefighters or cops or something, in that they have to be medically qualified on a frequent basis to, medically cleared, I should say, to do their job. So they have to go through an exam to where the physician says, yep, you're still in good enough health to do this, keep going. And so for that reason, they sort of look at, the medical community as their enemy, and somebody they want to, withhold everything from. And, they'll freaking, bandage over a bullet wound and claim that everything's fine. And, they've never, nothing's wrong with them. They just don't trust the establishment, because that's who they are. They're SEALs. That's why they're there, is to be a SEAL, and taking them out of their job is the worst thing in the world for them. So, when I got there, having been a SEAL, And not only was I a SEAL, but I had a really good reputation as a SEAL when I was in the SEAL teams, and in the military that really kind of means everything. What your reputation is like is the foundation on how much people trust you and value you. And there were still plenty of guys around, who were around my age that I had been SEALs with, that I'd done training with, or I'd been in platoons with, or, some guys even that I went through buds with. And, they all, came in my office, sort of, skulked into my office and closed the door behind them and said, "Hey man, let me tell you what's really going on." And, they started listing out this litany of symptoms. The first guy gives me this super long, thing of what's going about him. And, I've only been out of medical school, like, 4 years at this point or something. And so I'm still going through like the medical school version of the questionnaire review of systems, asking them all these questions. And it just seemed like there was something wrong with almost like every system in their body. But to look at him, you would say, that's a young, healthy, vibrant, fit guy. So what was going on? Like, I honestly didn't know. And so, that leads me to the point that most people overlook, or most people just don't realize, is that, doctors know very, very little about health. And I don't know about the UK. Like, I don't know how the UK doctors train, but I would assume it's similar.
Yeah, I think so.
We're trained to recognize, diagnose, and treat disease, right? And if you don't have disease, then we've got nothing for you, right? So, as a glib example, a fasting blood glucose of 126 is diabetic, and a fasting blood glucose of 124 is not. So, if you come in at 124, your doctor says, well, you should clean up your diet, or, something vague like that. And the reason he's vague is because he doesn't have any idea what to tell, what you should eat, because he's never trained on nutrition. He's not trained on exercise. He's not trained on sleep. He's not trained on stress mitigation. He doesn't know. And so you don't have disease. They've got nothing for you. So, the distinction between what mainstream medicine taught me and what mainstream doctors do and what I do is that I do health optimization. So I take people who aren't broken, but things are suboptimal, right? Like, there's lots of little things going wrong with them, that are suboptimal, things that they don't like. It's the deterioration in their abilities or the way they feel. But if you do, the gold standard diagnostic test on them, they wouldn't fit into disease, right? They might fit sort of maybe towards the border of disease, but they wouldn't have disease. And I just went about optimizing all those things, because honestly, when the guys came into my office and were telling me all this stuff, I had literally no idea. Like, I didn't have even a guess to start with. I was just, kind of shaking my head going, okay, and just asking more questions. And then I was like, all right, well, let me look into it.
So what kind of things were they saying? Were they just saying, "Oh, I feel tired," or "I feel groggy"?
Yeah. So they were saying, they were coming in and saying that that they're having problems with concentration, they're having problems with their memory, they're having problems with motivation, they're having problems with, they were controlling their emotions, relationships with their family, with their wife and their kids. A lot of them had really low sex drives. Some of them even had like erectile dysfunction. They were complaining that they were putting on body fat and, losing muscle despite the fact that they were eating. I mean, these guys have literally probably memorized every Rob Wolf podcast ever produced, and they knew more about nutrition than I did. I mean, they were insanely smart on that. They ate great diets. They worked out, on a very regular basis. So nothing really fit. And so, and then of course, just like generalized daytime fatigue. And, several of them mentioned to me, towards the beginning that they were using ambien to sleep every night. But, being a Western trained doctor, I was just like, oh, well, that's what you give people who can't sleep. So I didn't even really think about that, right? And so this is how smart I am. Like, probably around my 100th SEAL who came in my office to tell me this, I literally just kind of like started scratching my head and going, well, I wonder if this ambien is a problem, right? Because it seems like everybody's on ambien. And so I started going back through everybody's records, and sure enough, like every single guy who came in my office was using ambien. And, in the SEAL mentality, they're extremists, right? They're type A++, guys who, instead of 1 is good, two's better, 3's probably great, 4's fantastic. And then they'll chase that down with a couple of, cocktails. And so I went back and started re-interviewing these guys and talking to them about their sleep specifically. And they were telling me, I kid you not, they're taking 3 and 4 times the recommended dosage of Ambien, and they have been for years, and they're chasing that down with, some alcohol, and then they're falling asleep, and then they're waking up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they don't feel like they can go back to sleep. They're feeling restless, and so their solution is, well, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to work out really hard, and then I'll be really tired tonight and I'll get a better night's sleep. And then I would say, well, how long have you been trying that technique? And I'd be like, 5 years. And I'm like, keep going, man. Today is probably the day that's going to work, right? So, it was at that point, I would say kind of before that sleep piece really kicked into me, I was doing a lot with adrenal fatigue. The first thing I did is I just kind of started reading alternative medicine journals and books and websites and podcasts and all that type of stuff. And I was in a great position being, the physician for probably the most notorious special forces, unit in history maybe, but definitely in recent history. And I could call these guys up and I would say, hey, I read your book, or I saw your lecture, or I've been reading your website, and I'm a doctor for the Navy SEALs, and we're having problems that I think kind of fit in your area. Would you mind if I consulted with you, or would you mind if I came and trained with you, or whatever? And these guys were always, I don't think I had a single person say, no, I don't have the time, or no, sorry, but, I got other things going on. Every single one of them were overjoyed to help me. And so I learned a lot about adrenal fatigue, and I thought that this was really adrenal fatigue. Then the sleep piece hit me. The first thing I did is I went literally to basic college level books on sleep and what happens when you go to sleep. It's like 101, what should happen, what sort of cascade of events lead to sleep, what makes you sleep, what do we think happens during sleep. And then I just progressively learned more and more sophisticated information about it. And then the same thing, I consulted with all these experts about it, and sleep really tied it together. So apart from apart from what these guys were telling me about their symptoms, I did these, enormous lab panels, and primarily because I didn't know what the hell I was looking for. I was just looking for anything.
Look at everything.
I'm like, whatever, let's just test everything and see if we can find any kind of trend. And there were trends, and, the trends were that they had low testosterone, that they had low IGF-1, which is the end marker for growth hormone. They had high fasting insulin. They had high fasting blood glucose. They had high inflammatory markers. They usually had low thyroid levels, and then several other things that just kind of seemed really common with these guys, and really they just mirrored each other. One lab to the next, I just kind of got to the point where I could. I ordered the lab, but I could have told you what they were going to be before the labs came back, because it was just so damn consistent. And so, one of the things that I learned when I started researching was, that sleep drugs interfere with the sleep architecture. And when you interfere with the sleep architecture, you're not necessarily really sleeping, right? So if I hit somebody in the head with a baseball bat, or I guess for the UK guys, a cricket bat, and he falls down and hits the floor and he doesn't move, nobody would say, oh, look, he fell asleep. They would say, right, he's been knocked unconscious. And if you do an EEG on his brain, he would be unconscious, and that's what his brain waves would show. So,
what exactly? Sorry to interrupt. What's exactly the difference in terms of what's going on in your brain between being unconscious and being asleep?
So when you're unconscious, there's really nothing organized going on, right? You're essentially your brain is non-functional. Like you've hit your head so hard that your big neocortex, your human brain, has really dissociated from the lizard brain, which is sort of like the mammalian brain that almost every creature on the planet has. And so there's no organized activity. When you do a sleep study on somebody and you put all the electrodes all over their brains and you're looking for these neuronal bursts in various regions of the brain that should be very predictable, we can say, oh, now he's in deep sleep. He's in stage 3 or 4 sleep, and that's what we call slow wave sleep, and that's when you're secreting testosterone, and that's when you're secreting growth hormone, and that's where your immune system is functioning at its highest, and you're repairing all the damage to your muscles and tendons and ligaments, and fighting off bacterial and viral and parasitic infections, and like all that stuff happens during deep sleep. And then you bounce back up. After you've been in deep sleep for a while, you bounce back up to a region called REM sleep, which most people have heard of, rapid eye movement. It's just kind of a job security word. REM is just a basic description, and they came up with it by watching people sleep and go, look, his eyes are moving rapidly. Let's call that rapid eye movement. Like that's all it means, right? You go back into REM sleep, and during REM sleep, actually right before REM sleep, when you're in stage 2, there's these little spikes in electrical activity that we think is the initiation of something going on in your life. So some recent experience, whether traumatic or happy, doesn't really matter, but you start re-experiencing that event.
So that's the kind of emotional processing and committing to long-term memory,
Yeah. Okay. And so then when you're in that REM sleep, you emotionally process everything that's gone on, and then you start putting that stuff back in its files, right? And you put it back like where you put that like in the appropriate category. So, you and your wife getting in a fight over leaving your socks on the floor or something. That's not grounds for like, all right, I better pack my shit and move out, right? Because we fought about my socks. But if you don't emotionally categorize it, that's kind of a likely thing that you're going to put that in. That's going to end up in a wrong category, and it's going to end up either really extreme or not considered at all. It could be either way. And this is one of the things that happens with PTSD. And I think one of the reasons that it happens so frequently with PTSD is PTSD patients have a lot of trouble sleeping, and so of course the medical community gives them ambien, and ambien reduces REM sleep by about 80%, and so 80% of their emotional categorization is gone. So where do they put that? And who knows kind of what the mess that creates. And then, the other thing that happens in there, as you alluded to, is that you take things from short-term memory into, actually it goes from working memory to short-term memory to long-term memory, and then that's what we call a durable track, or something that you're never going to forget, like how to write a book, or how to ride a bike, or how to play the piano, or things like that. And then you bounce back down into deep sleep and back into REM sleep. And the first half of the night is primarily deep sleep. Progressively the deep sleep gets shorter and the REM sleep gets longer, to where in the mornings, it's almost all REM sleep. And that's when you should be waking up. And, if you're getting a good night's sleep and adequate sleep, people tend to wake up. And REM, and in that state, your brain is actually more active than your brain would be if you were awake. And so you wake up feeling refreshed, but you also wake up remembering your dreams. So none of that happens if you're unconscious. So if you get knocked unconscious and we did an EEG, not a single one of those things would be on your EEG. It would just be kind of like a random, bundle of lines.
Okay. Cool. So something that kind of strikes me is obviously with SEALs, it's going to be very, as you said, type A personalities, and obviously the job demands as well is like, as you said, like not sleeping for maybe a week at a time or getting an hour here and there when you're actually deployed in the field. How do you actually get them to value sleep? And like this obviously crosses over to a lot of people who'll be listening to this podcast as well.
Yeah. Well. Interestingly enough, as you point out, the SEAL community is not at all concerned about sleep. Sleep is a luxury, and it's possibly for weak people. And if you're tough enough, you don't need any sleep. So that was definitely a challenge. But fortunately, the ace in the hole that I had was what I was telling you about the deep sleep with the stage in the slow wave sleep cycles. Is when you secrete testosterone and growth hormone. And so these SEALs that came to my office with these complaints, I was finding these guys literally, so the normal range for testosterone, say like total testosterone, the normal range for that is 250 to 1100, and the way they developed that normal range. Hold on just a second. I'm gonna put this mic in a weird position for a sec. Okay. So, can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So, the way they came up with that range of 250 to 1100, which of course sounds like a ridiculously large range, and it is, that's data from Framingham. And, for people who don't know, Framingham is like kind of the first sort of long-term trial where they just went to a small town and they measured everything they could on people and didn't do any interventions and just kind of waited to see what happened to them and try to see if there was any correlations to death or disease, and that's where cholesterol numbers come from and all sorts of stuff. But so the criteria for for being tested and being put in the normal range was that you were 19 years old or older, and you had testicles, and that was it. So they didn't age adjust it at all. So when a 19-year-old guy has a total testosterone of 251, you would think, okay, that's probably not right, because the guys in the normal quote unquote normal range probably got their they were the 250 guys, or the 250 guys were the guys, in a nursing home, sitting in a chair, flipping a remote, being the most active thing they did. But, as I said, the mainstream westernized medicine, they just treat it as disease, not disease. So 251 is normal, and you're 25 years old and your total testosterone is 251. So and this happened. I sent people to endocrinologists at the hospital, and they're like, "Oh no, that's normal. He's in the normal range." I'm like, he's 28. His total testosterone is 253, and the guy's complaining about fatigue and lethargy and poor physical performance. Like, come on, like there has to be some sort of correlation here. And they just fought me on it. Like, no. So anyways, when I started trying to motivate the SEALs to sleep, I talked a ton about that slow wave sleep cycles, producing growth hormone and testosterone and repairing their body. And, that's when and then I would throw up case studies. Of course, I wouldn't use people's names, but I'd throw up other SEALs that I'd treated. And literally, like, this is no exaggeration, I had people's free testosterone, which is the more important number, testosterone. I had the free testosterone go up 500% over the course of like 9 months just from sleeping.
What kind of percentage increase was that of sleep? Was it like going from 3 hours sleep a night to 5, or?
Well, it's hard to say because I think the biggest factor was the sleep drugs.
Okay.
So I was getting them off of the sleep drugs at the same time I was improving, sort of their sleep hygiene and their sleep awareness and all of that, all of those types of things. So I would say that, obviously there's times in a SEAL's life when they can't control how much sleep they get, but when they're back stateside and they're training, which is the majority of the time, that's like 60 to 70% of the time they're back stateside. Most of the time they can get 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, and definitely like on off days they can do some catch up sleeping. So, these guys were sleeping, 7 to 8 hours per night. I had this one kid who got pulled out of training, and he was at a remote training facility we had, and he got pulled out of training and sent back. And they said, send this guy to Doc Parsley. Like, we can't train him right now because he's too much of a mess. He's hallucinating. Like, we're doing live fire, training, running around with
it's not a good place to be.
And he's freaking hallucinating. He's putting diesel fuel and gasoline trucks and all this, and he was just a total mess. And I talked to this guy, and he's like, yeah, I take 4 ambien a night. I drink two cocktails or 2 shots of whiskey, and then I lay in bed and I stare at the ceiling for 8 hours, man. Like 8 hours he stares at the ceiling. And most of the time you can't really trust a patient, not because they're trying to be deceptive, but there's just not a great objective experience of sleep, right? And like a lot of us, fall asleep when we don't think we fell asleep, and we sleep more than we think we do. But then, we sent this guy in for a sleep study, and he laid in the bed for 7 hours and never went to sleep. And he was on sleep drugs. He was on Ambien, and he'd done his normal routine. He just laid there staring at the ceiling. And when I saw him, he hadn't slept in a week. So he turned out to be like a TBI and PTSD patient as well. So, but again, just with this concoction of supplements that I had worked out over the years to get these guys off of the sleep drugs, I got him sleeping 8 hours a night with no sleep drugs, and tons of things turned around for him. I mean, it wasn't the only solution he needed because he had so many things going on, but it was a major life changer for him, and he's going to be featured in the book I'm writing. There's a whole chapter just about him.
Okay. Yeah, so before we get into like the sleep cocktail side of things, can we talk about a bit about sleep hygiene? Because obviously you mentioned a few things there and kind of alluded to a few things that the average person could do.
Yeah, so this term has been thrown around so much that I think it means nothing at this point. Like, people are just saying, it either means wear some goofy orange glasses, or it means nothing. So, like, what do you think of when you think of sleep hygiene?
So I think of blackout blinds. I think of a dawn simulation alarm clock. I think electronics out the bedroom. Those are kind of big 3, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So you're pretty close. You're pretty far down the path. So here's what I like to tell people about sleep hygiene, because it can just it's like nutrition, right? Like you can go so deep on nutrition to where it just becomes like an overwhelmingly complex thing that you just want to go, hell with it, I'm going to eat a pizza, but sleep hygiene is kind of the same way. It's like you can get on the internet and just search forever about like all these little gadgets and all these little techniques and tricks and whatever. So I tell people this, there's 3 things that matter for your sleep hygiene. the number one thing, and until this one is done, the other two don't matter, and it's useless to even try. The number one thing is that you need to value sleep, and you need to actually want to get a good night's sleep, and you need to trust that getting a good night's sleep isn't going to wreck your life or crash your business or, whatever people's fears are about, being in bed too long. So until that happens, and this is, my experience with working with thousands and thousands and thousands of people, they can do everything right, but if they aren't really committed to the concept, it just doesn't work. Now, number two, so 2 and 3, what I tell people on this is, you can go to the internet and you can look up a million different variations on how to affect these two things. But there's only two real things that you're trying to do with your sleep hygiene and your sleep ritualization. So as most people have heard of the term circadian rhythm, and again, that's another job security word. It doesn't mean anything. Circa is about, D is a day, so it's about a day rhythm. So It's completely non-descriptive term, doesn't really mean anything. But every animal on this planet uses the sun to know when to be awake and when to be asleep. And humans, it just, turns out that for whatever reasons, we evolved to sleep during the night and be awake during the day. And so when the sun starts going down, we have some ganglia in the back of our eyes that have nothing to do with vision. All they do is they sense blue light. And my guess is because the sky's blue. I could be wrong, but just kind of makes sense evolutionarily to me. So once the blue light decreases, those retinal ganglia initiate this pathway, and it's kind of a long circuitous pathway. But the basics of it is that this neuronal pathway goes back to something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is also sometimes called the master clock. And that does quite a few changes. I'll talk about that in a second. And then it eventually works its way back to what's called the pineal gland, and the pineal gland secretes a hormone called melatonin. And what melatonin does is blunt adrenal hormones, and adrenal hormones are stress hormones. They're called adrenaline is called adrenaline because it comes from the adrenals. So you blunt those things, and that helps sort of settle you down and your body down and get ready for sleep. Now, the other thing that the master clock does is it starts changing. It has these little pathways out to different regions of the brain, and it starts changing what these regions of the brain are doing, which neurotransmitters they're producing more of, which ones they're absorbing more of. And essentially what happens is it decreases what's called the wake promoting neuron or neurotransmitters. Obvious things like epinephrine and norepinephrine are wake promoting. Those are adrenaline. Histamine is a wake promoting neurotransmitter, which is why antihistamines help you fall asleep. And then, so you get a big change of all these chemicals, and that starts triggering your brain to do other physiological functions, and really it does a lot to the brainstem to tell your body to start doing a lot of its physiological functions. What most people kind of forget is that the circadian rhythm, when we talk about circadian rhythm, we're talking about the brain, but every single cell in your body has a biological clock. Even the bacteria in your gut have a biological clock, and they are working at certain times and not, they're doing different things at different times of day, but they, if they're out of tune with the actual time of day, they're doing them at the wrong time. And that can impact how you feel and your performance and so forth. But one of the major changes is that, the master clock causes some regions of your brain to produce this neurotransmitter, or actually it's a neuropeptide called GABA. And what GABA does is it goes to the neocortex and it shuts the brain down. It doesn't shut it down. I'm sorry, that's an exaggeration. It starts slowing the brain down. So it lowers, what we call the resting potential. So it takes a lot more energy, a lot more stimulation for that to pop up. And the reason for that is the neocortex is how we interact with the world, right? That's how we, that's how we see and feel and touch and, converse and all of this. Without that neocortex, we don't, there's nothing in our brain to kind of allow us to be aware of our environment. So you've probably had days in your life where, probably at the beginning of your working career, you've probably had days in your life where you've gotten a crappy night's sleep and you've woken up and said, man, first thing I'm doing after work today is coming home and going to bed.
Yeah.
Right? Like we've kind of all had that experience. But most of us have had this experience as well, where you wake up and you're just miserable and you're like, first thing I'm doing is going back to bed. And then the whole time you're at work, you're just looking at the clock going, man, I can't wait to get home and go back to sleep. That's all I'm going to do is go back to sleep. And then one of your buddies comes and ribs you into going down to the pub and grabbing a beer. And then you go, all right, I'll have one beer and then I'm going home and going to sleep. And then, like 6 hours later, you're at the pub and you're laughing and you're having a great time and you're chatting with all your buddies. The interesting thing is that you're drinking a CNS depressant, something that's slowing your brain down and should be making you more tired. But what's happening is that you've stimulated your neocortex, right? Like you've made it really alert. It's really alert because you're chatting with your buddies. It's really alert because you're enjoying yourself. It's really alert because it's loud in there. It's, sometimes it's an absolute cacophony. It's really alert because there's attractive opposite, members of the opposite sex around that you're checking out. And so you've overridden the GABA effect at that point. And people can do that, right? Like people can do that to themselves when they get in bed and it's like, okay, it's bedtime. Let me think of the last 398 mistakes I've made and the negative impact they're likely to have on my life. And then their brain just starts going and they're like, I don't know why I can't sleep. I'm like, oh gee, I don't know either. I mean, you're worried about the apocalypse when you're trying to go to sleep. So really all sleep hygiene is a combination of those two things. Controlling what we call light saturation, so trying to mimic as closely as possible the sun going down and, the way we evolved to sleep and the way, hunter-gatherers that are still in existence sleep nowadays. They fall asleep about 3 hours after the sun goes down. And they wake up right before the sun comes up. And that's, undoubtedly what we did ancestrally. So, all of these things like wearing blue blocking glasses, putting F-Lux on your computer, dimming the lights, maybe putting those Philips bulbs in your house that don't have any blue light in them whatsoever. There's films you can put on your smartphones. There's apps you can put on your smartphone that'll take all the blue light out of your screen. And all these things are meant to help you with the light saturation piece of that. The other piece of that is that when you wake up in the morning, you need to put a lot of bright light in your eyes to help you wake up. So that's, you can go through that list and there's an unlimited number of gadgets to help you either decrease the amount of light in your eyes at night or increase the amount of light in your eyes in the morning. But then the other component is that neocortex. You've got to slow your brain down. You've got to figure out, like, what can I do that's going to, kind of disengage my brain. And for some people, that's meditation. For some people, that's stretching. Some people, that's just, relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, whatever it is, but you have to disengage that. So the point of it being is that even if you have number one and you totally value sleep, and then you have number two and you've done all the correct light saturation, and you want to go to bed at 10 o'clock and at 9:59 you're still on your computer furiously typing email responses that are all, emotionally, rising, I don't know what the hell, or, emotional and instigating emotionality, then you're not going to be able to go to sleep, right? You can't just say, okay, 9:59, shut the computer, go lay down in bed, why the hell am I not asleep yet? You never slowed down that brain, and you overrode the GABA component for hours and hours. So that's really it. I mean, the neocortex is about stimulation. You have to decrease the stimulation. The other rest, the rest of the pathway is all about controlling light saturation. And that's why blackout blinds help, because you don't have lights coming in there. That's why a cool bedroom helps, because it lowers your body temperature. That's why getting electronics out of your room helps, because you don't have that distraction. You don't have little lights on your devices. All of those things are true, right? All of those things matter. But there's just no limit to them, and they can be greatly personalized to whatever makes you feel like, whatever sleep ritual makes you feel most like sleeping. The concept of sleep ritualization shouldn't be foreign to anyone. I mean, if you've ever had a kid, or if you've ever been a kid, you'll probably remember that there was like this protracted sleep ritualization, right? Or like where you slowed down your activity for a while, and then you went and took a nice bath, and then you put on your jammies and powder and whatever, and then you got in bed, and then you read a story, and then there was some snuggling and head stroking, and then you adjusted your animals, and then got tucked in, and then the lights went off. All right, I mean,
sounds great. I'd love
right,
that.
I mean, like we know that, right? We've been doing that forever with our kids, but for some reason we think as adults, oh shit, I don't need that, man. I'll just go straight. I'll just work until the last minute, and then go hop in bed.
Yeah,
doesn't work.
Yeah. Absolutely, I can see it's a huge problem, and what I really like there is you've just you've pointed out to just do the basic things. Like that's so important, and just to manage your stress in your life, it's a huge part of it. But when that's not working, or you've got something that's conflicting with that kind of routine, obviously you've developed the sleep cocktail for that exact purpose. How does that work?
So all the sleep cocktail is exactly what I just explained to you with the sleep hygiene bit. So the pathway for making melatonin is L-tryptophan to 5-hydroxytryptophan to serotonin to melatonin. And then there's a cofactor for one of those reactions in there, or there's a reaction in there that requires two cofactors, which is vitamin D3 and magnesium. So what I've done is I've put in all of the ingredients of that pathway, just in case you happen to be deficient in one or multiple of them. If you don't do anything right, it's not going to make you sleep, right? Yeah. Like you can't just blow off everything else I said and say, oh, I'll take the sleep cocktail and I'll be fine. It will help sort of accelerate that pathway and get you to the melatonin production pathway faster. The melatonin that I put in there is literally just like a very light dusting to sort of help you initiate the pathway. But if your brain doesn't keep going with the pathway, it doesn't help. You'll still wake up, because if your brain is just not making melatonin, there's not enough melatonin in that product to keep you asleep all night. Okay. And one of the reasons for that is I don't want to desensitize people to melatonin. When people take melatonin over the counter, they're taking 1 milligram or 5 milligrams. I've seen people taking 20 milligrams, and from the time the sun goes down until the time you wake up in the morning, your brain only produces around 3 to 6 micrograms of melatonin. So I try to keep that low, because I'm going for physiologically normal stuff, right? I'm not trying to go for any kind of tricks here. And then the other component that's in there is GABA. So there's GABA itself doesn't. If you put GABA in the bloodstream, it doesn't get into the blood-brain, doesn't get past the blood-brain barrier very well. So this has the pH GABA in there, which basically just means it has this little ring on it that allows it to cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain, and it acts just like GABA. Unlike things like benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax, or sleep drugs like the Z drugs like Lunesta and Ambien. Those are GABA analogs, so they chemically they don't look anything like GABA. They just bind GABA receptors with a lot more intensity, and then they bind it with such intensity that they essentially just dissociate your brain. And that's why there's all sorts of crazy stories about people doing ridiculously odd things on GABA or on Ambien and Lunesta and having no memory of it whatsoever. So that's it. I mean, you can't put serotonin into the brain or into the bloodstream. So minus serotonin, I put in all the ingredients of that pathway, and this isn't something that I just said, oh, here's what we're going to do. It's like I started with vitamin D3. And I figured all the seals were vitamin D3 deficient because they were working at night, sleeping during the day, and you can only get vitamin D3 from the sun. And I knew on their labs they were vitamin D3 deficient, and so I said, oh, let's give them all vitamin D3. And of course it helped a little, and then I added magnesium, and then I added 5-HT. Like over time, it took it probably took close to 2 years to come up with the end formula that we have now.
And that's probably why it's such a good product, because there is that constant evolving nature, rather than going, we're going to try and make some money out of this issue. Like you've actually fixed the problem first and then monetized it.
Yeah. And there are definitely a lot of people in the supplement industry just trying to make money. And I really don't want to run the supplement company, but it's just something I have to do right now until I can kind of hire somebody to take it over from me. But to produce a high quality product that's been that's tested, that has as many ingredients as mine does, and that's produced in an FDA compliant factory, it's not cheap, man. I mean, there are people that are making products that cost $1 and they're selling them for $100. Like those are the people that are just trying to crack the dollars out. But my product has a very, very, very thin profit margin.
Yeah, I bet.
Even though it's relatively expensive,
Yeah, it's one of those things that'll be well worth the money as well. It'll be well worth the money. Is there any way we can get it in the UK yet?
I'm actually having some conversations with people in the UK right now who are searching what's called HTCs, homogeneous tariff codes, to figure out what category it fits in there. Literally every country is different and has their own regulations. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's very time consuming and very costly to get all these lawyers to agree on it. And then the people in the business who have experience I've talked to said, just send 50 boxes the first time, because even though you do everything you think you're supposed to do, a lot of times they'll kick it back or seize it or whatever. So it's a process to get it out there. It'll probably, I don't even want to make a time estimate, because I've told people I told people 3 months, 9 months ago. So I don't really know. It's a long process. Now there is a there is a company in America that will ship anything you buy in America to wherever you live, and you can find them on the internet. I don't remember their name. And it's not like you're ordering freaking heroin or something. So I guess
is that not the secret ingredient?
Yeah. So I think the worst that could happen is it could get seized, but I don't know the legalities of it, but there's a company that I know some people in the UK and Canada have been using to just have it shipped. Like they buy it, it goes to that place, and then they ship it directly to you. So it basically takes the liability off of my company not selling to a place that I'm not cleared to sell in yet.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, as my housemate has started hoovering above me, and I'm sure you can hear it, is there... Right, I've got one more question, actually, about people sleeping for 8 to 9 hours, but still waking up feeling broken. Is that something that's very common, or is there a simpler way to fix that, or can you see something that's probably going on in that issue?
Yeah, so... It really depends, we'd have to do a whole nother podcast on how much people's the evidence around how much sleep people
I'd love to do that at some point. It's a huge subject.
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting, at least to me, and I guess I'm a bit of a sleep nerd, but it's actually really interesting how they come across the data. But there is a sort of fairly broad variation between how much people need to sleep. So there's the 7.5 hours plus or minus 30 minutes is probably around 80 to 85% of the people. I mean, I think it's close to 100% of the people that we've that have been through these tests to determine how much sleep people need. Yeah. But it was a small select group. I mean, it's not like we did a million people through these trials. It was 20 here and 30 there and so on and so forth. But what I always tell people, some people are afraid that they sleep too much, and they've read articles that said if you sleep too much, you die earlier and all this. And that's a bunch of crap. Like, you're not going to die because you sleep more. If you're sleeping more because you have some sort of metabolic disease, having some sort of metabolic dysregulation or disease is going to make you feel more tired, and it's going to require more sleep to repair your body. It's just harder for your body to restore itself, and so you're going to need more sleep. But by the same token, like, I'm a 9-hour guy. Like, I literally sleep 9 hours almost every night, and I have since I was, like, in a child, like, when adolescence, and ever since that, like, I've always slept about 9 hours a day, and that's what makes me feel good. I can get by on less, but that's sort of my optimal sleep time. And if your sleep time has always been 9 hours, I would say don't sweat it. Like, it just is what it is, and be happy that you can sleep that long. There's a lot of people who would give their left arm to be able to sleep more than the 4 or 5 hours they're able to sleep. But I would say if you've always been sort of a 7.5 hour guy, and then over the course of a year or two you start going to a 9 or 10 hour guy, then I'd say get a good functional medicine doctor and get some labs done and figure out what's going on. There's probably some kind of metabolic dysregulation or hormonal imbalance or something going on.
Okay, that's something to bear in mind. Well, yeah. I think because I've got to shoot off, I'd love to do a part 2 at some time, because I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but I'd like to say thank you so much for jumping on the call. It's really helped me out, and it's been a great episode.
Yeah, man, it was cool.
Right, so
I'm happy to come back on. You can you can just communicate with my assistant, and she'll put you back on the books.
So where can people find out more about you and the cocktail?
Currently the cocktail itself is on a URL called Sleep Cocktails with an S, all is one word, sleepcocktails.com. Turns out that's a terrible name for marketing purposes, so we're changing the name of it. And I have a website called docparsley.com, which the product is also on that site, and there's some other information. There's some frequently asked questions. There's a couple of blogs. There's kind of my philosophy, whatever. But we're within the next 3 to 4 weeks, we're relaunching that website in a much bigger, better form. With some professionals helping me out instead of doing everything myself. And then the Sleep Cocktails site will actually will be in the docparsley.com URL. And the new name of the product is going to be Sleep Remedy. Cocktail makes people think that a lot of people think it's an alcoholic drink, and it gets blocked by a bunch of firewalls at corporations and government institutions and stuff because it has the word cocktails in it. And so there's all sorts of reasons not to have that name, but
I guess if you give something to the SEALs to name it, it's not going to come out best.
Yeah. I mean, the SEALs just started calling it that, because it was just like a concoction. It was like this mad scientist concoction that I kept adding more and more stuff, and they were having to drive around to 3 or 4 different stores to buy all the ingredients, and some were in powder, and some were in liquid, and some were tablets, and some were capsules, and Some came in 3 month supplies and some came in 1 month supplies, and and it was just a pain in the ass for them. And so they just kept going, "Doc, make this into a product." And I'm like, I will. Having no idea what I was getting into when I did that. But
well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm hoping a lot of people kind of find out a bit more about you and kind of do a bit more research into you, because it's a really cool product, and I think you can really help people.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, and thanks for the kind words. And I look forward to having some more engaging conversations.
Sweet, man. Cool.
Yeah. All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
If you're looking to find out more about the Alpha Movement podcast and the Alpha Movement in general, you can find us at alphamovement.co, facebook.com/alphamovementofficial, and you can find my stuff under Tom Foxley on various social media sites like Instagram and Facebook. So yeah, follow us, spread the word, and if you can leave us an iTunes review, I'll be eternally grateful.